meeting. This is a joint meeting of the Hardwick Electric Department Board of Commissioners and the Hardwick Select Board.
Recording in progress.
I'd like to officially call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. The first item is to set and adjust the agenda. Great, keep going. The next item is communication from the audience. Is anyone here for something that is not on the agenda? Great, there will be a chance for you to ask questions for some of the items, so thank you. All right, so next we have item 1, presentation of the Jackson Dam feasibility study by the Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District and SLR International to the Hardwick Select Board and Hardwick Electric Commissioners. This will also be followed by a discussion of next steps and additional information needs. One quick item of business, sorry I forgot this. If you have not signed in, please go ahead and sign in. If you're a member of the public, we do have some information here as well. So,
About dams in general, not about this.
yes, just with dams in general. Thanks.
Thanks everyone. Hi, I'm Emily Finnegan. I'm the district manager for the Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District. I work for the Conservation District, and we do this type of project quite a bit in the sense that we work with colleagues in ag and natural resources and private landowners and farmers to understand the choices they have related to natural resources and provide them the people and accessible information they need to make the best decisions for their families, their livelihoods, towns, and natural resources. So this is sort of within the work that we do with many towns and entities in Caledonia County. We started this work in early 2025, and our idea was to coordinate with the work that SLR was already doing in the Upper Lamoille, modeling the Lamoille, and also through Hardwick. And this project was an alternative that was identified in that, and then we fundraised a little bit more money to get more details on this alternative to improve the flood resilience of Hardwick and the surrounding area. So I'm going to just turn it over to SLR to present the findings from the feasibility study, which was completed at the end of the year in 2025.
Okay, so with that said, we are going to attempt to get the right thing up here on the screen. It has a little box. There we go. Perfect. So I am Jessica Luisos. I'm a water resources engineer at SLR, which is a consulting company here in Vermont. We have been working on a variety of river-related projects all around the state, many of which are flood mitigation. Most recently, we worked on the Lamoille River hydraulic modeling and flood study, which looked at Hardwick all the way down through Georgia, encompassing this area where we're doing the dam, so it's kind of an overlapping project. We generally focus on water-related engineering projects, some of which are flood mitigation, some of which are restoration, other ones focus on water quality. We have done a lot of dam-related projects, including many dam removal-specific projects over the last many, many years. So we're going to be talking more about this tonight. And I'm here with...
My name is Josephine Alling. I'm also a water resources engineer with SLR, working on this project with Jess and Emily.
Sorry, can you speak up?
Yes, sorry.
All of you.
Sounds good.
One more thing before you guys get started. Yeah, and we just want to acknowledge that we have a lot of information here. There's still information that we don't know, and we're definitely open to questions and figuring out together how to move forward. And I have a document open here where I'm going to be writing down all the questions I hear that we don't have answers to. I think you're all familiar with the parking lot concept. So the parking lot is here on my computer. Yeah, and we'll try to get through the information in the feasibility study because I think it's important to make sure we all have the same information to start with. And we're hoping to have enough time after the information is presented to sort of like have a more robust discussion about next steps because that is definitely what we're here to talk about. So yeah, clarifying questions during the presentation, awesome. This is kind of complicated stuff. But after we'll definitely get into a more robust discussion. I'm hopeful.
Yeah. So just thinking about that, we are going to go through kind of this agenda, thinking about the background of the dam, what is going on out there now, then really thinking about alternatives, what might be able to happen in the future, and what those next steps may or may not look like, and some really good discussion. So I think it'll be good to hear feedback, with the feedback, like Emily said, mostly at the end, unless there's clarifying questions as we go along.
Great. I'm just going to talk a little briefly about some of the background of Jackson Dam itself. So the dam is owned by Hardwick Electric Department and the town, and it's located about 50 feet upstream of the Route 15 bridge. You see it right as you drive through town. It's also known as the Hardwick Lake Dam, sometimes the Jackson Bridge Dam. And this dam impounds both the Lamoille River and Alder Brook. And so impounds basically means that the dam holds back a lot of water on both the Lamoille, and then it also creates Hardwick Lake to the north, kind of storing a lot of water behind it. Talking a little bit about the history, it was officially built in 1920 and also was rebuilt in 1952. So this makes it about 106 years old today, and it has been 74 years since the last significant repairs to the structure. The dam was originally intended to store water for hydroelectric production downstream in Wolcott at the hydroelectric plant down there, but it also hasn't been used for that purpose in many years. Beginning in 1975, the dam was regularly lowered in the winter, and this was to reduce ice jams in the Lamoille upstream through town. Jackson Dam created a significant change to the landscape in Hardwick. So the map on the right kind of shows what this landscape looked like before the dam was built. Where we can see Alder Brook coming in through the north, from the north, and Lamoille kind of coming from the south and curving around through town. So basically this dam has changed this landscape significantly, I think is the big point of this map. And this picture also is a really great shot of what this dam has done to the landscape, where you can see this huge lake that spills out kind of to the north of the dam. And this was courtesy of the Hardwick Historical Society, so we appreciate the support with that, finding these historic images. Pivoting towards what is how things currently look like in Hardwick Lake. These boxes kind of show,
Yes. Boxes.
These boxes show kind of areas where the lake has changed a lot since the dam was first built. So we can kind of see these open water areas have shrunken in, where looking at the upstream end, a lot of sediment has filled in and has created like a big wetland complex at the upstream end of the lake. And at the downstream end of the lake, a lot of this open water area is now fully covered with sediment, and there's like these big piles of vegetated sediment where there's trees growing and a lot of wetland sort of infrastructure there. So a lot of the landscape has changed a lot since the dam was built, and also as it progresses in the future.
So thinking about the existing conditions of Hardwick Lake, just building on what Josephine was saying about how the lake and pond area has changed over time, one of the biggest pieces of that is that accumulated sediment. On the map up on the screen, there's kind of a red hatched area that shows the areas where it previously had been just water, and now there's been a lot of sediment deposit. There's also a lot of sediment that's deposited under the water where you don't necessarily see it. So we have done some probing in the area to take an initial look at what's there. We've also done a small amount of sediment testing to see if there's anything kind of dirty in there. So, essentially it's a large area. The lake extends 2 miles up Alder Brook. At the upper end, having, you can see on this image on the side. The upper end at Alderbrook has a nice wetland complex with some beavers active up in that space. The rest of Hardwick Lake is relatively shallow with about a 7-foot max depth based on some probing we had gotten, or I guess it was boat bathymetry that was done by DEC a few years ago. So we do have some information up in the lake, but not a ton. This is certainly an area where we could use more information. The dam itself is a concrete dam founded on bedrock. There's some spillways. Spillway is an area where the water purposely goes over the top. There's also some outlet structures, one of which is used in the wintertime to draw down the lake. There's also a very large wall that extends kind of north through town that you wouldn't necessarily think is part of the dam, but it is helping to kind of guide the water over and through this part of the dam that you think of as the dam and down through the Route 15 bridge. We have some plans. These aren't the original plans. They are from the 1952 repairs, but they have quite a bit of information about the condition and the different parts of the dam itself. You know, as it says here, it's about 523 feet long and 23 feet high. So imagining that if it's holding back, 23 feet of water, and we're seeing not that deep of water, there's quite a bit of sediment back there as well. There has been some inspection work done. When the dam was inspected in 2001, there was a drawdown done so that there was, it was quite visible at the time. That was done by Knight Consulting Engineering. At that point, there were multiple cracks, including a horizontal crack across the upstream face of the dam. And you could see that the cap repairs that were done in 1952 was starting to fail at that point, and there's some cracking around the outlet structure. So basically, surface deterioration and undermining. It was identified at that point that those repairs should be done with some additional cost estimating done at the time by Du Bois King to kind of target repairing those items that were identified as deficient at the time. So I think one of the things that I want to point out here is that this was 2001, that's 25 years ago, and this work has not been done to date. At that time, it was estimated to be $600,000. With inflation and increased rules and design standards, that would be very significantly more than that number to, kind of bring it up to safety standards at this point. Since then, there has been multiple flooding events, which may have, created additional deterioration that was not even identified or present at that time. So with that, the state has a dam safety program, which regulates dams. With that, there's some different classifications that go along with that. The Jackson Dam is classified as a significant hazard dam. So basically what that means is that in the case that there is a dam failure, what kind of damages and risk do you see to the downstream area? And a significant hazard dam means that it has been proven that in the case of failure, there would be property losses and damages to downstream infrastructure. And those were specifically called out as the Route 15 bridges, the McAllister Farm Road Bridge, Cape Brook Road Bridge, Fisher Covered Bridge. In addition to both the Route 15 and the rail trail as they're on both sides of the dam, flood zone downstream. So we've had some discussions with the dam safety program. They have specifically noted in their inspections, every one since 2010, that the dam is in poor condition, meaning that there's some real structural deficiencies to it. And the discussions with them indicated that the additional repair is needed to bring the structure back into safe operating conditions and meet the dam safety requirements. They also noted that even if the dam was repaired, the threat of failure remains. There could be damage to it in the future or an overtopping event that would continue to have risk. They noted that if there was a dam removal, it would eliminate that potential damage from a future failure and eliminate the maintenance costs of keeping up the structure. So that was kind of specific from the dam safety program. And they did kind of back up the idea that we presented on the last slide about the cost, that there is a significant cost to kind of bringing these structures up into compliance. They have noted that there's significant analysis needed in order to kind of bring the dam into the dam safety compliance, which as part of that, there was the suggestion to consider pursuing dam removal as an alternative path to kind of the other upgrades that would be needed in the case of keeping it. They also did recommend that the operation of the dam at the lower level year-round could be one way to reduce risk until a permanent solution could be pursued. So, there has been quite a bit of dam safety kind of analysis and consideration at the dam over the years. I'm going to turn it back over to Joe.
I'm going to look at the ecosystem and wildlife considerations. Currently, the dam and the Hardwick Lake itself has plenty of birds, mammals, macroinvertebrates, and a lot of these plants and species were identified in a study that was done in 2013 by Sterling College students. And so the lake itself has created a thriving community of species. But I think it's important to note that the dam acts as a barrier on the river and has created some negative impacts, both upstream and downstream, to a lot of different species and to the habitat itself. The dam is a barrier, so it blocks the flow of water upstream and downstream. So this is problematic in terms of fish passage. And so removing the dam would reconnect a little over 10 miles of river and high-quality trout habitat, both upstream and downstream, and also would reconnect a lot of habitat on these tributaries that enter the Lamoille. And the river carries water, but also carries sediment, and so the dam blocks this sediment from passing through. And we talked about this a little bit before, how the sediment's being impounded behind and building up behind the dam. So interrupting this sediment passage has created a lot of sediment starvation downstream, and that kind of creates an ecosystem that's not great for macroinvertebrate habitat and also for fish to lay their eggs in the substrate. It kind of prevents that from being super effective. Also, the regular drawdown of the dam in the wintertime kind of creates a fluctuating environment where animal species and plant species don't really know, they aren't able to establish naturally because of the changing environment that's created by this. And also, the drawdown has caused some fine sediment to flush downstream, and this has smothered habitat in the past. And so this kind of smothering of habitat downstream as the dam is drawn down kind of impairs fish habitat and other species downstream. So removing the dam would kind of stabilize the ecosystem. It wouldn't be fluctuating year-round and would also allow fish passage and restore a lot of the sediment transport that's being blocked at the moment. So looking more at that sediment, so this is kind of a map of where we looked and where we probed some sediment around the dam. So we used a big 14-foot rebar rod and probed down to see what's the depth of the water that we're seeing, and then below that, what's the thickness of the dirt that's on top of that. And that gives us an idea of how much sediment is built up behind the dam. So looking at a profile, this is might be hard to see from where you guys are sitting, but essentially, if you were to cut the river down the middle from upstream, starting at the Cottage Street Bridge, downstream to the McAllister Farm Road, what the slope of the river looks like. And from this, we can kind of see, it shows the water surface elevation, so this is where the water is, and then below that, where the surface of the bottom of the river. And from our probing, we were able to see there's a chunk of sediment that's built up below that. So this creates like a wedge of sediment built up behind the dam. And our probing was able to establish kind of where the original channel bottom was before the sediment kind of filled in through there. And there's a little bit of ambiguity, I think, upstream, there's this kind of a big steep drop off kind of near the LVRT bridge, and it's a little bit of unknown how far upstream this like wedge of sediment extends, and it's a little bit harder to determine there because instead of it being super fine, the material in the river becomes a little bit firmer and there's more boulders, and so it's kind of harder to tell how the dam is influencing things upstream of there. We did a similar assessment looking at Alder Brook, and so looking at what the river looks like from the Route 14 culvert kind of way further north of the dam all the way downstream to the dam itself, and what the path of the river looks like and how that slope is changing through here. So the basic idea here is that the whole extent, the 2-mile stretch of Alder Brook and Hardwick Lake is very flat and shallow. And we are able to look at a depth map of the lake kind of to determine what that shape looks like. And the idea here is the water isn't going to move very quickly. If the dam was removed, there may be pockets of water that might remain. There might be some remnants of a lake in the future. But I think a big thing here is we didn't do probing further upstream into the lake and kind of in that confluence region in the transition. So I think that's a big data gap at this point, is like kind of understanding what Hardwick Lake would look like when the dam is removed.
Yeah.
So using all of this like data and information that we gathered, we are able to crunch the numbers and estimate how much sediment is built up behind the dam. And so we're looking at pretty large numbers. On the low end, it's 620,000 cubic yards of sediment, and then on the high end, it's a little over 2 million. So this is a lot. And this is going to be a very big piece of the puzzle in terms of moving forward with this project, and is going to be a big design consideration as we look to figure out what we want to do next. So another really big piece of this puzzle is the flood mitigation aspect. Emily mentioned we did a flood study of almost the whole Lamoille River Basin. We wrapped that up last winter. And a piece of that, we looked at a lot of different alternatives in Hardwick of what we could do in town to help mitigate flooding. And the dam was one of the alternatives that we looked at it, and it did show promising results. So in this project, we refined kind of some of the hydraulic modeling that we were able to do to really dig into what changing the dam would change flood levels in town, and how that would impact things in the future. So yeah, I think we can look at the profile next. So we tested an alternative in our model. We removed the dam, we excavated the channel, so we removed all that wedge of sediment that's built up, we removed it, and we also lowered some of the floodplains that are next to the river. So you can imagine if we just lowered the channel down 20 feet, and then the floodplains are all the way up here, you'd have like a big canyon. So in order to reconnect the floodplains and make the river flow a little bit better, we'd lower the floodplains down. And so this alternative did those three things: removed the dam, lowered the channel, and lowered some of the floodplains just upstream of the dam. And these results show that in both a large and a small flood, water surfaces are going to be reduced upstream of the dam. So for a large flood, you're looking at like 3 feet of water is going to be lowered, or for a small flood, even more, 6 feet. And these benefits extend kind of upstream of the Lamoille Valley, like the rail trail bridge, kind of up towards Cottage Street. So like that's kind of where these benefits would end. And the water levels downstream of the dam wouldn't change.
And I guess the one other thing I'd say about this study, the bigger Lamoille study, we did do some presentations, so some of you may have seen them back in November, or maybe it was early December, and that information and report's available. But we also looked at other alternatives that extend kind of between the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail and upstream in combination with this. So when we're just looking at the dam, kind of what we're showing on the screen is true, but as you start to potentially add additional flood mitigation projects, like some that you even have grant funding for right now, those benefits continue to move further upstream. So, you know, this is maybe part of a group of alternatives and things that you as a community may move forward with over time.
And then we were looking at the river kind of sideways, and now we're going to look at how those water levels are changing, like from a map view perspective. So here's the existing conditions flood map of like a 100-year flood, which is similar to what happened in 2023. And so we have the water kind of moving through and kind of crossing over Route 15, Wolcott Street through town. The dark blue is where the water is going to be the deepest, and the light blue is where the water is maybe less deep. And we have a few locations called out, like on the road, next to some buildings, where we can see the depths of water at this 100-year flood depth. And then switching to our proposed conditions, so this is with the dam being removed, we can kind of see that water is shrinking in closer towards the river, and kind of not spreading out through a lot of these buildings and infrastructure. There is still flooding that's going to happen. It's not the perfect solution. It's not going to solve flooding in Hardwick, but it's going to really improve a lot of the impacts by feet in some cases. So I think this is really promising results in terms of flood mitigation.
Okay, I was kind of flipping back and forth between the existing and proposed, just to give the visual there. Yeah, okay, so here's the dam. This is the proposed condition, so I'm actually gonna go back to existing conditions. So this is Wolcott Street coming down through, Route 14, 15. This is Route 14 with the gas station. The dam is right here. Is my cursor keeping up? Yeah. Lamoille Valley Ford and things. So when I flip now here, you can see that these businesses in this area, like the Ford, are now dry, and a big portion of Wolcott Street is now dry. So the did that. Any other questions about this? I know it's sometimes hard to see on maps. Yeah.
One quick question. Did you model, or would it be difficult to model the intermediate situation where the drawdown level is, as you said, maintained full year? The winter drawdown, how does that affect the flood level?
Yeah, I think that's a really complicated question. You need some different special modeling to, there's different types of models when you look at rivers, and the one that you would need to answer your question includes like hydrology and the timing of like how much of the flood can come through and like fill up behind the dam before it starts to expand and go over. So that's a different type of model. And then we have a hydraulic model which models where water's going and things, but it doesn't have the same timing of a storm. It's basically like a snapshot. Like we say, during a flood, this is what happens with the existing conditions. So it's We don't have that answer. Yeah. That's a good question. Yep.
Behind Grand Union, there's quite a bottleneck where the ice jams up. Have you looked at that scenario? Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And what would that be done to address that? Because if that's still there, there's still gonna be a problem.
Yeah, so the model does include that whole area and the idea of where the ice jamming happens. So the ice jamming is happening there now because that's kind of where the back of the lake is. So if we go over to here, you can kind of see that the water is really pretty flat through some of these areas. The blue line is like the flat pond behind the dam. And then the pink line has some slope to it. So that's the like proposed water level. So basically like as you go from a flat pond where the ice comes down and hits that flat pond to, if you take the dam out, you have slope to it, the ice will be able to keep going instead of hitting that like tabletop of water.
But the lake isn't behind Grand Union where that bottleneck is. She's talking about Walgreens. Tops.
I'm sorry,
Is that here? Here.
So sorry. Yes, they did look
So
at
it
that.
is
It was
upstream.
the other presentation they made back
Yeah.
in December. I don't want to,
Yes.
No, that's good, but if that doesn't get addressed, you're still gonna have a jam.
it's in process.
Yeah, in
That was-
process.
I'm not sure how that is, but we'll get back to you.
Okay. So we are going to move on to like the next piece, which is velocity.
Yeah, kind of like Jess said, we're going from a flat tabletop to now a more of a slope. So as you can imagine, the velocity of water is going to increase through kind of this upstream area of the dam. And we have modeled this, and I think it's just another consideration in terms of a design process of making sure we're protecting the infrastructure that we have to withstand these velocities. I will say that the velocities they're going to be increased. I think it's about the maximum that we're seeing in this area is about like 9 feet per second. And for some context, the water that's rushing through town and kind of through this town area is kind of in the range of like 10 to 20 feet per second. So even as we're increasing the water velocities in the impoundment or the previous impoundment area, the velocities through town are going to be a lot faster than that already.
They're already faster than that, and we're
Yes.
not
We're
changing
not-
that.
yes.
So I don't want to make, we don't want to make it sound like we're making it faster, but you've seen really fast velocities, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about, slightly faster.
And just as like the water, the flood benefits kind of stop at the Cottage Street Bridge, we're not changing velocities further upstream of that. So that's kind of where the influence of this dam kind of ends. And I think the last question there was, is the dam providing flood storage? And I think that kind of speaks to that timing question. And with the modeling that we have at the moment, we can't necessarily pin that down in terms of what's the storage that's provided by the dam right now, and what's the storage that's going to be provided by the floodplains that would be created if the dam was removed. I think that's a lingering question at this point. And we already mentioned the ice jam flooding, and I think this is something that's actively being managed with the winter drawdown. And removing the dam wouldn't necessarily fix ice jam flooding because it's still going to be a thing that's going to be actively managed. There's the granite blocks that are upstream of town that have some mitigation benefits, and potentially removing the dam would limit the fact that you have to deal with it every winter in terms of the drawdown.
Okay, so we are going to talk about the idea of dam removal and what that might mean. So, just a few photos here of the dam itself. We actually think that the dam removal itself is actually relatively straightforward of the dam part. So, it is concrete, it is just a discrete amount of concrete, there's bedrock there. So there's not really a question about like how deep you would have to go or how wide you would necessarily need to go. So the idea would be that we would remove all the things that you can see in the picture, you know, the spillways, the control structures, the little bridge, down to, you know, essentially where the concrete is. There is this wall here, which basically like collects the water in so that it goes under your bridge. That would stay, because we still need the water to funnel in and go under the bridge. With the velocities that Josephine was talking about, you know, you can imagine that if this is just ponded water and now there's a channel here, there might be faster water along the edge here. So we are, you know, assuming in our concepts here that you would need to have some amount of bank armoring or rock along the bank here just to make sure you're not causing erosion right around here or near your bridges in there. So we do have some plan views. So this is looking from above, the footprints of the areas where we might do different things. So our concept generally includes, so here is the Wolcott Street, Route 1415. We have the dam here, which, as I mentioned, would be completely removed in this area. We have the channel where you see water kind of all the time up here, where we would need to be removing some sediment to make sure we're not leaving just a wall of sediment in the river. And then we have the wall, the concrete wall, some of which you might never have noticed. And we think that this would be a wall that would probably stay in place. It's relatively low through here, and the idea of kind of opening this up for more floodwater to come across Wolcott Street isn't really that appealing. I think we would, you know, recommend leaving that wall in place and then doing bank armoring around right upstream and under the bridge if necessary. So I think those are the really big pieces. It seems relatively straightforward, as I said, but and I guess I'd also say that we've done, you know, dozens of dam removal projects, both across the state and across the region, and the handling of the dam itself is relatively straightforward. The piece that in dam removals that is not always as straightforward is what do you do with all the dirt? And, you know, I'm going to call it sediment because it is in the river, and in the river we call the dirt the sediment. It's probably a mix of dirt and sand and gravel and boulders, you know, at the upstream end between Cottage Street and in the area in the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, you can see it's boulders. You know, as you go up into Lake Hardwick, you can see it's more of a fine dirt. And kind of in the area right behind the dam, it's also kind of a softer material. So it's going to be a mix, but it's all sediment. And, you know, as Josephine said, this is a really large area. The image on the screen right now is up in Alder Brook, and you can see, you know, there are some remnants of channel through here. There's some deeper areas on the sides, and then also a lot of sediment that you can see, and none of which has vegetation on it up there at this point. So we've done some thinking about what kind of sediment removal we might do. No sediment removal is a little daunting. It would mean that both rivers would be left as is when the dam would be removed, and as the water flows down, it would cut down and kind of move sediment on its own. And with the numbers that Josephine was talking about, I mean, we're talking about, you know, possibly even millions of cubic yards of sediment, and where that goes is really quite scary. You know, if you let that erode naturally, you could see it, lots of it moving maybe all at once in a bigger flood, clogging bridges and roadways. When you see a lot of sediment move at once and it clogs a channel, it means that all the water that would otherwise be in that channel is kind of choosing its own path of where to go. So this, the idea of not removing sediment feels very, very risky. Like there's a lot of unknowns about exactly what that would look like, other than clogging bridges, clogging channels, smothering habitat. So we actually don't think that regulators would allow this type of approach. And, you know, we're mainly bringing it up to say that the sediment's such a big deal that something would need to happen. You know, so this is really not what we would call a feasible alternative. We do have downstream dams that would, you know, including ones that are being used for hydroelectric, that would, you know, kind of catch a lot of that sediment, which is not a desirable outcome. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, we also looked at full sediment removal. So this is all of it, and all of it is a lot. It would be a very significant task due to the large volume that we're talking about. From our rough estimates, I mean, you could spend between 13 and 50 million just moving the dirt and not even doing all the restoration and everything else that goes along with it. It would be very invasive to areas that may or may not need this amount of digging, and it would disturb areas that potentially have some vegetation already starting on it. So one of the things that we have noted is there are some areas that are do have some vegetation, especially around the edges, where you could kind of jumpstart some stabilization. So this one's also not recommended to remove everything.
Is this clean dirt, or is this going to have to be treated like hazardous material?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So on an earlier slide, I showed 2 dots. They were called J1 and J2. And so we did do a very small amount of testing of the cleanliness of the dirt. We tested for the suite of different contaminants that we would typically, that are regulated by the state, the PAHs and the heavy metals and all of those things. And in the 2 spots that we sampled, that was clean. We don't have a reason to believe that it's dirty. And once there would be more of a decision about where you might want to be digging and removing sediment, there will need to be a more extensive analysis. But because at this point we didn't know what's the area we're working with, we wanted to just get a really quick kind of initial look. So it would make a big difference in how it could be handled and where it could be moved. So it is a big deal. These numbers here are not are assuming it's not regulated as contaminated. So the third alternative here about sediment is this is the recommended alternative, and the idea is that you could do some more analysis. You could, with a more informed view, target the sediment removal of the spots where we are all convinced that the sediment is going to move on its own. If we are convinced that it's going to move on its own, we want to get it out of there actively. And in the spots where we think there's not going to be as much sediment movement, we want to stabilize it in place. So that means that in the channels themselves, where we're going to have water running in the channels, we'd want to make sure to get that down to the right elevation and dig that out. We think in the vicinity of the dam itself, where there's kind of the tallest piles of sediment, it makes sense to also probably target those as well. And the last point on here, I think, is a really important one. And this is one that we haven't seen implemented much in Vermont. We need to get a lot more information about it, is the idea of a phased approach so that you could naturalize parts of what's now under Lake Hardwick in place with vegetation kind of before the dam is fully removed, so the dam could stay in place as like a sediment control barrier, essentially, while portions of what's now a lake are becoming vegetated and the sediment's drying out and stabilizing in place. So we think there's a pretty large area there where that could happen, most specifically upstream. We do have some maps that show this idea. So on the screen is basically what I was just talking about. The idea that it's hatched in blue. So where we are, the dam is down here. We have Route 14 running along the edge of Lake Hardwick here, and Wolcott Street running this way, and then the rail trail here. So the idea being that the areas in red would be the areas where you're kind of targeting the deepest amount of sediment digging out and removal. Lesser amounts where it's not as deep in kind of the yellow-orange, and then in the blue, targeting that for stabilization in place. So vegetating it and leaving it as much as possible. So the numbers here are huge. And, you know, even with large areas being vegetated in place, there would be a really quite large project to be able to do this. So zooming in, you know, just to kind of break up the areas here. Here again, we have the dam itself, and Wolcott Street here, and the rail trail here. So in all, you know, just to see these numbers out loud, the sediment in the river channel itself, like underneath the flowing water on, you know, on a dry day where water really needs to flow to create a river, is 63,400 cubic yards. And in the kind of areas adjacent to it, kind of the red crosshatch here is where we would kind of bring it down to create some floodplain areas that would flood if you had a storm. That's another 123,500 cubic yards. So even though, you know, we're only talking about in this concept digging in a relatively discrete area, it's a very large volume. We liked the idea of the phased approach of maybe considering the idea and really talking with regulators about the idea of keeping the dam drawn down through the growing season, you know, at least a growing season to start to get the edges and upstream areas vegetated as much as possible before doing kind of active digging work at the dam. And that is an approach that we don't have a template for here in Vermont, so more so than other dam removals we've done, I think there needs to be like a kind of more intense back and forth with meetings and site visits with all the regulators to really kind of see what that approach would look like and what that process would be. In cross-section, so now we've kind of sliced across the river. You can see kind of the brown's the dirt, the solid is the current dirt elevation. This is just right upstream of the dam. So the gas station's somewhere a little bit downstream of here. And this is across where there's a lot of cattails and vegetation right now. So the brown solid line is the current dirt level. If we took out the dam, we would need to dig it down to remove a lot of this sediment buildup behind the dam. What's nice in this approach is that in the future, if there's floods, water would be able to get out and onto these floodplains, which slow down water. They provide a lot of water quality benefits and habitat benefits. So, you know, instead of just having a big wide area of water, you would now have these vegetated side areas or floodplains, some of which might be wetlands that provide kind of these other benefits. So cost, it is a pretty wide range of cost here. So we have somewhere between $4 and $9 million, which is a very large number and a very large range. And part of the reason that we have a very large range here is that depending on the level of the sediment removal, how close a fill site could be, if some of the sediment removed from the river could stay kind of maybe on the side of the river at the valley wall edge. Like there's a lot of kind of unknowns at this point to be able to nail down exactly what those numbers are. There's also a wide range of costs related to, does the vegetation come in naturally or with the seed bank that already exists in the sediment? Or do we need to go in and do active planting of trees and specialty seeds? So, you know, some of these details can make a really large difference. You know, just thinking about the planting, if we're talking about planting actively 110 acres of Lake Hardwick, you know, that's a big undertaking versus, you know, natural seed bank that might be out there already. So, you know, those are some of the big cost drivers that we're seeing there. So like I said, this is a pretty large-scale, complex project. A lot of the dam removals that have been done in Vermont so far have been smaller footprints, but this is not out of the range of continuing to tackle. Kind of going back to the dam safety and our recommendation, the do-nothing approach is really not recommended. I mean, this dam is continuing to deteriorate, and without a very large investment is going to continue and become, you know, progressively more of a flood risk, with the idea that an uncontrolled failure would be extremely devastating. So, you know, the proactive approach of, you know, a dam removal of some kind is really kind of, I guess, what we're seeing as the path to safety here. You know, in addition to, you know, a lot of the, you know, the benefits and ecological function that Josephine had talked about. So with that, we do have next steps here. There's probably some technical questions as well. I guess what I would say is I'll just quickly go over what these next steps are, and then we can have more discussion. I know Emily has some things she'd really love some feedback on. So there will be ongoing outreach. Like, you know, I don't think I know there's not a definite decision on an exact path. So, you know, this is still in the feasibility stage where we're really trying to think through what are the options, what they might look like. So I know there'll be continued outreach and discussion. We pointed out a few areas where we really need to get more data to be able to really nail down the informed approach. With a project this big, getting input sooner than later and throughout the process with the regulators on like what approach might be allowed is going to be important. And then we'll get into the real engineering and design and eventually doing something. So I think that's it at this point. So I don't know if you want to handle questions or a few things you want to talk about what your goals are first.
Yeah, I guess I would love to ask if there are any questions at this point. I have a few things that, you know, the things that I'm hoping to get feedback on are, you know, what the timing of public involvement and outreach, when in the process, sort of like how comfortable folks feel with the level of information that we have about this alternative and other alternatives. And then sort of, and then more nitty gritty, like if the boards decide that we want to continue down this path of data collection and, you know, 30% design is the specific step that we would take next, you know, how do you want me and other engineering folks to work with the Hardwick Select Board and HED? So far, I've been working with an advisory committee that was put together by Opie and Kristen, and that's been going great. I don't know, I'm happy to continue that way, but I do need some like point of contact or group of contact to make sure that I'm including stakeholder voices in the process. I mean, it's your dam, it's not mine. So yeah, so those are the things that are on my mind, but I would love to hear. I'm sure there are questions out there, so let's take a look.
Thank you. Paul, can you pause for just 1 second, just for point of order? Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people here, which is fantastic. We have some public, we also have commissioners and board members. It is a public meeting, so we do need everybody to state their name, so that way Amanda can write that down. Could you also state if you're a commissioner or board member, so that way Emily can note that as well. So if you were not here at the beginning of the meeting, Emily has offered to answer questions, and if there's not an answer, create a parking lot of questions to follow up with, which is fantastic. So I think we can go ahead with questions. So please state your name. If you are a commissioner or board member, also state that as well for the notes.
Okay. And as chair, are you okay with us continuing just field questions, or do you want to?
I mean, I will jump in as needed, but I think it makes sense for you to do that for now.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Paul Fix with the Hardwick Gazette newspaper. Has anyone looked into the possibility of removing Jackson Dam, but somehow damming Alder Brook at the confluence with the Lamoille River to retain the benefits of Hardwick Lake while eliminating the problems that the dam causes?
That was not a modeled alternative in the study that was done by SLR. My initial reaction is that building a dam in Vermont is very hard. From a regulation and funding perspective, I am aware of other dam removal projects that have been stalled because the alternative was proposed to build something in its place, and it's going nowhere. Yeah. So no, it was not considered as an alternative.
Thank you.
Jake Lester, I'm a Hardwick Electric Commissioner. My questions are mostly regarding downstream impacts. You spoke a little bit to sediment, the fine sediment impact for ecosystem. I'm curious about downstream assets like bridges and downstream dams. Could you speak to the sediment loading, how far down the river sediment could travel in each outcome? I know partial sediment removal is recommended. So in that case, what would be the anticipated loading downstream? And then also I think folks will be curious about flow rates like water downstream. Are we going to increase speeds, say at downstream assets, not just in the next quarter mile, but a few miles down? And I know you have a study in here about the whole watershed, so even 5 miles down or further. I appreciate all the look at the in-town flow and sediment loads, but yeah, what are we looking like 3 miles, 5 miles downstream?
Yeah, great question, and we've heard that question a lot throughout the process, the impact on downstream communities. It's definitely been highlighted as something that we want to make sure we're considering. So I don't know if you can speak to whether a model could tell you those things.
Yeah, the question came up towards the beginning. So there's different types of models that look at water flow. Our model does not include, it's not a hydrology model, which is basically where you see how flow changes along and accumulates. So it doesn't have that timing and flood wave piece to it. It is basically saying at a peak flood, where is all the water and how far does it go and how fast is it going? So answering how the storage might change and if we're gonna be releasing more water downstream, we actually don't know with this type of model. I think it's an interesting question. What we can certainly say is that, you do have a wall in the river right now. A lot of the year it's full, so any water that's coming in might spread out a little bit across the extent of the water, but it's gonna be going over. When it's drawn down, it has more capacity to actually have that water slow down and kind of stop for a while behind the dam. But that's only the case for part of the year right now. If we take it out, what happens is you get floodplain storage. So as the river water rises in a flood, it gets out onto the floodplains, and all the trees and vegetation, everything really slows the water down, catches ice, catches debris, and really slows it out. So you get that floodplain storage. So I think what's hard for us to answer right now is like, what is the comparison between the floodplain storage we anticipate and the current storage behind the dam? So so we don't know the exact answer. And then the answer about the sediment is that we did do a yield analysis, and there is about 107. I mean, it makes sense. Like, we actually figured out like about how much you might expect to come down every year. And naturally, rivers do produce sediment. So anytime you have a naturally flowing river, you are going to get sediment downstream. And knowing that you now are going to have some areas where you have extra sediment piled up at the edges, it will be higher than just if you didn't. So there would be more sediment coming down.
Coming down below the
Yeah,
current
between the current dam and downstream.
dam. And do you have a sense of like deposition, like where that sediment would be deposited?
Yeah, and this is certainly one of the questions that is going to go on the parking lot, and we're going to be answering further in the next phases, because in order for us to get a permit to do the project, we are going to have to answer that question.
Okay.
What is there now? What do we expect to move? And what is the timeline we expect it to move under? So that is why the cost range is so big right now. We don't know exactly how much sediment we need to remove so that we're not creating those downstream impacts. So, and that's why the sediment management piece is like the biggest part of this project, because, in the next phase of doing our data collection and like refining the concept design and talking to the regulators, that's when we need to answer that question. Like, we can't go further past 30% design without getting buy-in or understanding that and then getting buy-in. So, is that all?
Yeah, I think so. I think just for context, even generalizations about like where or how far sediment might travel would be appropriate. I feel like for informing everyone. Just knowing that I saw there was some alternative, like there was some floodplain work that could happen downstream that might slow water, and then the general concept that slower water would deposit sediment there. I think everyone's concerned about the downstream impact. So yeah, thanks for answering.
Tim Rigadello, Hardwick Select Board. I am curious of what effect, if any, this will have on the Pottersville Dam, the hydroelectric generation, its ability to generate electricity or store water, or what's, if we know that.
So we've been told that there was a time in the past when the two are kind of linked together. So there was storage and release up here in order to like facilitate what goes on at Pottersville, but that's not happening now. So I think from our perspective, the biggest change at Pottersville would be related to sediment. So I think it kind of ties into what we were just talking about.
Lisa Cathcart. It's been my experience that hydraulic models and Mother Nature don't play by the same rules. And it seems also like there's a lot of data that's missing. I have a whole bunch of questions. I want to also make a couple comments. One of my questions is, how is the quote-unquote disappearance of this lake going to affect the water table of the people who live on the lake and our wells? There's a lot of natural things that I don't think anybody knows about. This wildlife study in 2013 is vastly outdated. We did not have eagles nesting there every year. We do have loons. We've had them since long before anybody realized that we had loons. And there's 5-6 beaver dams at the north end. When the beavers move down because there's no water, are you going to remove the beaver dams also? I have a lot of questions. Do you know where the fish go when you draw down the lake? Because I can give you videos of where they all are. They're still in there. So there's like a lot of data that it seems that you don't have. And it's another thing that I noticed is that the sediment buildup downriver also coincides with when the state stopped dredging the rivers. They used to dredge them routinely. So part of that has to do with them not dredging anymore. For now, that's what I have, but this is a big report and a lot to go through, and I haven't got a paper copy to make notes on. But I would be happy to join your group.
Noted about the paper copy. And I guess my general response would be like, yes, there's a lot of data that we don't have. We had $25,000, you know, that's all we had. So we collected the amount of data that we could get with that amount of money. And I think we've been pretty transparent about the things that are still missing. In terms of the lake and the wells.
Yeah,
that is a question
so
for-
this is actually
yes.
really good. So basically, we have to start somewhere. And I think this phase has done a really good job of identifying, like, what are the other things we still need to look at? And that's where we're at. So the wells is a good one. We have addressed wells at multiple dam removals we've done. In one case in Manchester, we actually did drill neighbors' new wells. So looking at wells is something we definitely want to put on the parking lot and get the well information. One of the dam removals we did this past summer, we did do an analysis of actually a public water supply well where we were taking out a dam. And that one was completely hydrologically disconnected because it was so deep. Like, it was no longer related to the water at the surface. So I mean, so it is something we will need to look at before we do anything.
One other comment I would like to make is Hardwick Lake is the first open water in the area for migrating flocks. So it just does not affect the local wildlife. It will affect the wildlife that travel through here, because for the last 100 years, it's been a stopping ground for them.
Eric Jonathan, local inhabitant. I guess it's more of a quantity than a question, but I exist believing that I am not separate from nature. In fact, I have full faith in that. And so to me, it's inconceivable that we sit here as natural beings and think we have any control over any of the elements of this earth. You know, apparently, according to my studies, the earth was here before we were here, and it knows how to keep itself in order. And so I'm just astonished that we sit here and think we have any control over the movement of water. You can look at all kinds of videos of water moving around this earth in the past years, and you can see that water doesn't care whether you dredge, whether you have a stream bank, whether there's dams, whether there's real estate. And so, to me, it's like, what are we doing sitting here trying to spend $25,000 because we're in a capitalist system and ignoring our life force? And I'll just leave it at that, because it really irritates me that human beings are so out of touch with where their life force comes from.
Emily, one of your questions for the commission and the board was about kind of next steps. And I really appreciate you being so, Kaylee, select board, sorry. Was kind of how the board feels about that. So I'm wondering if there's some commissioners and other board members who want to weigh in on kind of the next steps. I mean, it seems like in order to make any decisions, there are a lot of questions that we need to answer. To do that, we have to commit to wanting to find out more about it. So I'm curious if there are other commissioners and board members who want to weigh in on that timing process.
I have a question. I don't know if this is the right forum, so redirect me if there's another time or place to ask it. But and I always wind up, I'm just going to go at it from the opposite direction, but I hear you. One of the feasibility questions would seem to be, for a project that's going to cost many millions of dollars, where's the money going to come from? So, and I ask that not as a select board member. I'm Roger Prego, I'm a Hardwick Electric Commissioner, that's another way. But I ask it more as a local resident, a taxpayer, that as you've kicked it around, when you saw it going up to millions and more millions and more millions, at a certain point the feasibility gets affected by that, if there isn't free money from the federal government or some other source. So how are you thinking about, or how have other dam removal projects in communities like ours, where we don't have a ton of money to throw around, where's the money come from? And you know, if it gets to a certain point,
right,
even if the science says it's a good thing to do, admittedly there's other considerations, even if the science says we got a plan that'll work, we got to have the money to execute the plan.
Yeah, I think with this dam, and from what I've seen, it's important to consider that there is a cost to not removing it, right? So there's that repair cost and the ongoing maintenance cost and the new dam regulations that we communicated with the dam safety program that will come into effect in 2027. So what I like to think about is that I know that there are sources for dam removal funding. I'm not going to promise $5 million in dam removal funding, although I would do my best to find that and work with many other folks to help find that. I'm like 99% sure there's no funding for repair or continued maintenance cost of a piece of infrastructure like that. So I think while removal is quite expensive, the options available for funding are much greater than continuing as a do-nothing approach.
I guess
Well,
just
I
to,
just implore,
Yeah.
last thing I'll say, I would implore this committee that's looking after us to not assume that we have to spend whatever it takes, because I don't think many residents here would be happy with that. There's got to be a limit, there's got to be a realistic amount of money
Yeah, and that's
that
something
we can
that,
apply to this, and otherwise, yeah, sure, do nothing may not be appealing, but do nothing is an option. So if we convince ourselves do nothing is not an option, then the sky's the limit. We'll just go ahead and spend where we have to.
You've
And if
got
that's,
emergency management, so if you do nothing, they'll clean up afterwards.
so
Right.
I'm not advocating that, I'm just advocating a clear-eyed view of the dollars.
yeah, I think Jessica. has
yeah,
something to
I
add.
guess I'd just like to address that. I was trying not to say every little thing that's in our report because I wanted to get to this part of the discussion. One of the main reasons that we're recommending a phased approach is that it allows for more flexibility and adaptive management to figure out where can we save money, where can we not do something, where can we change the approach partway through before we're committed to removing 180,000 cubic yards of something. So the biggest reason I think that I'm advocating for that phased approach of get the data, come up with a plan, and then have time to be able to adjust the plan based on where we're seeing revegetation happen naturally before anybody's committed to millions of dollars of actually doing something. I think there's a lot of steps in the process where we could make decisions about things. Especially about if there's vast areas where we don't need to do anything, it would be great. And I guess the other thing I would say is that we have seen dam removals supported with federal funding. We had one come out last year this past summer in West Rutland that was supported by FEMA. We had one based on the flood mitigation of removing the possibility of the downstream flood wave, which is a reason to remove the dam. And then we have another one that's coming out this summer in Springfield. We just had a successful bid, and that was also, so that one I think is actually congressional directed funding like an earmark type situation. So there's definitely ways of, once we have a really good plan of figuring out what that might look like without just saying right now, the taxpayers are paying for it. I don't think anybody's suggesting that at all. I just want to be clear about that.
And just for the record, the town of Hardwick has spent $0 on this study.
Thank you.
No taxpayer money has been spent on this.
Everything comes from taxpayers.
Well, out of the municipal or the electric department budget.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Are Hardwick officials being reimbursed for the time we're putting into being on this commission, is there?
I'll just comment, we're citing members of the commission, so how much time we spend here versus in other assets or other meetings.
I'm thinking Opie and Kristen who are on.
I haven't spent any time. I answer a couple emails, maybe.
So I have a couple questions for you all.
Yeah.
As I do think, I think it's important for us to note that it's a good question, Roger. I think there are questions like that the town itself needs to answer. But really, we need your expertise to answer, how this actually really works. I think the money question is really on us to figure out how we do it. So I was really interested in this idea of not drawing down the river to see what happens in terms of revegetation. That is essentially free, right?
No.
That would be a choice for us to just not.
For the one.
Or is it the
not
opposite?
fill it back.
Or
You're
it's
draw-
keep it
Keep it drawn down, I think is the option.
Yeah, I think that's what you're meaning.
You're right, sorry. So that would be so my understanding from what you just said is that would be an option to see what naturally revegetates.
And we wouldn't
As
be
a
committed
phase.
to anything if we do that.
Correct. So
We-
I'm just putting it out there,
we-
that's.
I want to clarify that.
Okay.
We may need permission to do that because and that's why we want to like really explore with the regulators what that might look like, because if Hardwick Electric chooses to keep it drawn down, you would have vast areas of just exposed dirt, which we need to make sure that there's permissions in place from DEC and Army Corps of Engineers and dam safety. So there is a significant regulatory approval part of doing that. So we are not recommending that you just next week keep it drawn down, because you need to make sure you got your ducks in a row first.
But that could be a phased option.
Yes.
Okay.
There's no construction cost likely with that.
So thank you for clarifying that. And then my other question is, if we were to do this and the river, and there wouldn't be Hardwick Lake essentially because the brook and the river would shrink, right? Would there be places that would be developable with the flood lines change? Because it is a large acreage, like the area by the solar panels, would that become developable for potential housing? Or, and maybe it's a question more for Kristen, like how would the 100-year flood lines change, and would that make parts of Hardwick developable that are currently not?
I think it'd be a fun.
No, not the sediment
I think
areas,
she
not the
did.
sediment areas, sorry.
Yeah.
So
I
the map
think-
was really helpful.
Yeah, what I would say to that is, if you look in this area here where you can see the aerial photo, I'm gonna flip to existing conditions. Under existing conditions, those properties have quite a bit of floodwater and have had quite a bit of flooding. We are expecting those to be dried out during floods. So under the footprint of the lake itself, I think it's very unlikely that under the footprint of the lake you would all of a sudden get developable area. That said, there could be kind of passive recreation type things, maybe like paths or things like that, where you maybe don't have a structure, but there's potentially access. So that would be my impression.
Yeah, and I think part of any next steps, I'm not sure at what part of the what part of the approach this would come, but would be visual renderings of what Hardwick Lake, what we think it might look like. So I don't think, that would definitely be part of any design process, is helping folks and ourselves envision what that area could be in the future.
So were you,
I've noticed in the last few years, we've had some great drought, not great, meaning great, but significant drought, and a few 100-year storms, which seems like is going to be the new norm. How would the loss of this body of water, should the dam be removed, affect the town's plans for drought mitigation? I know you're working on that as well, and it's right now a source of water in the event of emergency. It could be a source of power in the event of the grid going down, whatever. How does that fit into your whole scheme?
that might need to be a parking lot.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't looked into how you're using it as part of your drought plan.
Yeah.
So parking lot item.
The river will still be there.
Huge, and the beavers will block it up, it's okay, I'm always
I
gonna
mean,
have
I don't
water out. And the other thing is in 2000, when we voted to keep the lake, at that time when we were talking about the dam, there was a contractor who was willing to take that silt for nothing, all of it.
Yeah, and you know, I think that that is part of what we would want to explore. Like, who could take it? What could the uses be? Are there portions of it that would be useful for using on your roads, selling to contractors? So I do.
Farmland.
Farmland potentially. So, I mean, we need to check those areas, make sure we're not filling in wetlands or floodplains somewhere else. So there's definitely like checking of where it could go, but it's true. It really factors into the cost. So having that time to figure it out is valuable instead of just saying we're going to pay to truck it X, you know.
So will the lake be drawn down again this summer for more study?
That's definitely not on that. I mean, we are thinking that that might be part of a phased approach, but no decisions have been.
It wasn't,
Yeah.
I don't think it was drawn down last
You think
summer.
it was just drought?
It was just drought.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the operation of that dam,
Yeah.
but I think the it's been told to me before that those gates are set to run of the river.
Yeah.
So whatever the water level and the rain flow dictates the levels behind the dam.
Yeah. Okay. So you won't have to draw it down and do any more studies?
We do not currently have a plan to do any drawdown other than your normal operations.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's always helpful to see it, but there's no plan to do anything like that.
I'd like to ask, Paul Fix again, I'd like to ask a process question. Did the two boards involved here have a plan before this meeting about how a decision might be arrived at? And if not, is that part of your agenda to establish how this group might make a decision going forward about what to do? And whether to proceed with studies, whether to end them, whether, you know, what is the process to decide how this will work going forward?
It's a great question, Paul. I think Emily said it the best, which is this is the time for us to get this report, ask questions, and then really figure out what the timeline is and how we want to move forward. I think that's what we need to decide. We haven't come up with a plan. I don't think either board or commission has said this is the direction we want to go. This is really our first step together in getting the information and then deciding what the next step is.
So my question isn't about the next step of the dam. It's the next step in coordination and planning how you might arrive at a decision about the dam.
Sure, I think we're saying the same thing, that the next step, we have to decide what the next step is. Do we want to have a next step in terms of planning and what do we want to send back? So I can't answer that personally, it's up to the board and the commission to decide.
So my question is, will you arrive at whether you'll make a decision tonight or have another joint meeting in the future tonight, or will we leave this meeting with that unknown?
Anyone else?
I assume that we are going to discuss it at a select board meeting, but at current time, there's no agenda on the item, or there's no item on the agenda.
Thank you.
This really knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
Amen to that.
So it's Roger Prevost, this time speaking as Hardwick Electric Commissioner. My personal view as a commissioner is that the $25,000 has been well spent. You got a huge amount of information now, but that information appropriately in the document said, and we think you should get some more information here, and we think you should get some more, you need some different set of experts, so some you can do, some other people should do. So that my view is that Hardwick Electric commissioners don't have enough information, that we're miles away from enough information to make a decision. One of those things was the dollars, but there's a whole bunch in there that you recommended we get more knowledgeable on, we gather more. So that would say we're a long way from, I think, being ready to even chart our course and vote on it. We just don't have anything to vote on except additional information. So the next vote is likely to say, let's spend a little money, take a little time to get some more information.
And
That, now, others comment. I don't know if the select board feels that way or others do.
Sounded like we got some agreements over here.
Yeah,
in that.
I agree with that.
I mean, one of my questions would be, because it sounds like some of the, we got this 30% of the design, which is great. What will be the cost of those next steps, and then how far do we want you to go?
Yeah.
So I think for us to make a decision, we would have to have an estimate saying, this is, and you all know this the best, this is really what we recommend in terms of the next step for designing and more information gathering, and this is the cost. And then we can decide where that money comes from.
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify now that my intention is to not have it come from the town. So there are plenty of grant, design costs relatively quite a bit less than actually doing the project. And those sources, I'm like well versed in those sources and feel pretty confident that I could find funding to take the town to 30% design. Now, what we have now is a feasibility study, not 30%, just to clarify. And yeah, I think, so I can get an estimate for that. I could also say, with that estimate, here's the source that I'm thinking, here's the list of sources that I would tap into, here's what I would need from the town in order to tap into those sources. I think I'm not, obviously not looking for a decision about the dam, because I too feel like there's just not enough information still. But I guess the clarifying, what I would need to move forward is, yes, we want more information on this alternative of dam removal. And we're interested in continuing down this path that we've sort of already gone down. That's the sort of confidence that I would need in order to proceed to the next.
So not necessarily a motion, but a general nod from both the commission and the select board? Or would you like a motion that we want more information and an estimate for the cost of that information?
I think a motion will probably be nice.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that
It's all right. I'm waiting. It's more or less Dave Gross, Hardwick Plan Commission, and I served on the task force, or whatever title you want to give it. My one thing throwing out, I think the whole point where we are now, obviously this is great information, and it does point us in the direction of where we need more information. It also tells us that what we're looking for is actually a longer timeline before any action statement happens, because we just don't know enough. My one concern is from the Hardwick Planning Commission town plan, preservation of recreation areas, preservation of natural habitat, wetlands, that this all represents. So that's one thing I think that also has to be factored in. And the obvious thing is, if magically we pull it out and just let it all go, aside from all the sediment and everything, it would drop the water, it would obviously drain off the wetlands that are established and whatnot. So there would be a loss. So the idea of go slow is, I think, the appropriate approach to that. And this is more of a technical question for the Hardwick Electric Department people, is right now during the filling up, it's a predetermined level, I assume, or is there a way to say we'd like the lake to stay below a certain level, type of thing? What would be the lake level during the summer? And would it be possible, as we're doing this additional studies and research, to slowly lower the lake level to see what effect it might have? And I'm talking about, the idea of it's 7 feet deep now, what happens if we tried to run it a foot less? That would also expose more bank area, and then you'd have, obviously, the vegetation able to encroach. And I'm a big fan of beaver dams, keeping open water and wetlands. So the idea of encouraging that. So one case I could see as we move forward is that the lake disappears, but we have a series of beaver dams holding open water and maintaining all of that. But
Yeah.
throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is a type of phased approach that we would probably consider when we're considering, is this phased approach the right way to move forward? And if so, how do we work with regulators to make sure that works from a permitting standpoint? But that's sort of how I see that question, is like fitting within that discussion of, if we decide to take a phased approach, what exactly would that look like?
So instead of throwing down the lake and you have to remove silt anyway, why don't you just remove the silt and see what happens? And why doesn't the electric company want to make power there? It used to make 10% of the power for the town.
So I'm Scott Johnstone, I'm General Manager of Hardwick Electric. On the question of the level of the pond, the lake, we have to work with the state on that, and there's prescribed numbers we have to hit. It's true on every. I see the Caspian Lake folks here. It's true there. It's true everywhere we work. So again, we'd be back to regulatory. We'd have to at least work with the various parts of the Agency of Natural Resources if we want to hold it at different levels than what is prescribed. So we have numbers we have to hit. Doesn't mean it can't be worked through over time. And we still, just to answer you, we still have to. We're not currently generating any power because Pottersville Dam got flooded in 23 and 24. We have a $6 million project to do to bring that back online. What changed is all this dam and 5 or 6 others all used to be designed to release water at times when there wasn't enough to generate at Pottersville and every dam downstream. And that's not an accepted practice in Vermont anymore. So really none of them release. Is it impossible that it would ever be allowed again someday in the future? I'm not in the business of predicting the future. Today, it's not something that anyone does.
Yeah, it just seems like hydropower has come so far since that was built, and it's just ridiculous not to utilize it if we have it. And they used to put the boards up in those slats to raise the level to make the power.
Correct. If it was a taller dam, I'm not arguing for that.
Yeah.
You could put microturbines and things on it to help pay for reconstruction and things like that. But there's not enough head, there's not enough pressure to spin a turbine off of such a short dam. I've not done the analysis, but I suspect that's the case with what I know about hydro.
Thank you. So I just add, it seems like that there's, which is very amazing that we have so much public interest already. If we ask SLR to continue exploring this, and Emily, that there will continue to be more public input and opportunity for more feedback. I super appreciate everybody. There's some really amazing questions. It seems like we need a motion from the select board to, for you to bring us an estimate and talk about where that funding can come from to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'll make that.
We've got a motion from Larry.
Second.
And from Tim, great. Any more discussion from the select board?
Can you just clarify exactly what the motion is? I just want to make sure. I want to make sure Emily has some good direction.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I have a lot of notes. So, so the motion would be to ask for you to come back with an estimate for gathering more information in a design. It sounds like a design portion. This is the feasibility study. So it would be for an estimate for that, and then so it sounded like there were some potential funding opportunities for that work. And I think that there would be probably within that estimate some joint board meetings to further discuss those options as well. Right. That doesn't all have to be in the motion, but that's what.
If I could just suggest one thing while you're discussing it, I think it would be helpful whether they include it in their core estimate or if they included it as a possible addition to address the issue about hydrology and running a hydrology model.
For downstream, specifically.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions here about that. There's a lot of questions, there'll be a lot of questions in Wolcott about that. And so I think it'll be really expensive. That's partly why I suspect they don't use that model for these early stages, but we ought to at least know what it costs.
cost, because it's coming up a lot.
Yeah, and I would say 30% designs can have different things in them, so it's really important and awesome for me to hear today what are the primary concerns and what, you know, what folks would want 30% design to focus on and maybe do a little bit more digging on. Yeah.
Kaylee, could you define, you said the motion was ask for you to come back. Could you replace you with a name of what you refers to?
For the select board? For the select board?
You said ask you to
Oh,
come
I'm sorry.
back.
Okay, great. We're asking Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District and SLR International to create an estimate for us
For 30%.
for a 30% design. Any other discussion?
Yes,
Is it a discussion about the motion, Eric?
it is. Everything that I talked about is connected to everything that exists. So it seems clear to me, and I came halfway through, but I'm relatively quick with my conscious awareness, that this is all completely out of our control. People keep talking about these mysterious regulators and these inscriptions and everything else. Army Corps of Engineers, all of these engineers that are in this private industry out there creating bottom lines for their corporations. So ultimately, it doesn't matter. We can all have a nice science, debate here about hydrology and sediment and how rivers do this and that and cattails and eagles. But ultimately, the decision has already been made at the level of the regulators. And if we don't understand that, you don't understand where money comes from. Money comes from the life force of we people who have labor, and we create all of the infrastructure, including the dams, and take down the dams. That's where money comes from. So if you're saying we're getting this for free or whatever, it doesn't work that way. Everything is paid for by the life force of everybody who's involved in building this empire. And so if we're going to sit here and think we have any say that this is some kind of due process, we've become completely insane. It's already decided at the regulatory point. They've already decided they know what the science is, they know what the engineering is, and it doesn't take into consideration common sense or the natural life force we all live in. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor of the amendment, you got the motion. This is the Hardwick Select Board. I know we're spread out. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstentions? Great. That motion passes. Thank you so much for doing that work and providing an estimate for us in the future. Is there any more discussion of this topic? We do have another item on the agenda. And I do think there were some folks who are interested in the full report. That is available in the board packet online. So
It's also online. If you go to flood resources, there's a section that's called Jackson Dam. It has a copy of this presentation. It has the full copy of the report. It has some pictures of some older pictures that Liz was gracious enough to help me find, and it also has some of the environmental information. It also has some of the environmental information that was out there.
It's a really great report.
It's a long report. This is the section too.
Could someone share the date of this version of the report we're referring to now?
The top one is the page.
March 13th.
The date of the report is March 13th, 2026. There was an earlier version from exactly 1 month before that of February 13th. In that month in between the two versions, we did make some edits and additions based on the previous meeting with the committee.
No, you have one question?
I have one question.
Okay.
It's not a question, actually. I'm Norma Reason, and it doesn't matter what boards I sit on. I don't sit on these boards. I'm here only to speak as a resident of the town of Hardwick. All of us here just got inundated with an enormous amount of information. People out there haven't. I would urge the board, don't get over your skis and forget that a lot of public information information dispensing needs to happen. And I know that takes time and effort and possibly your return, but it seems to me that's only fair and right.
Yeah, it's well taken. Thank you for bringing that up. Before we move on, I want to give Emily, Joe, and Jess a round of applause. It was really is there anything else? I don't want to like dismiss you. If there's anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I would give a round of applause to you all. This is a really big, complicated issue, and I think moving to the next step of like, what is the next data collection was really helpful for us to be able to say, okay, we're going to come back to you with a list of tasks that we think are the next step. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. So we do have an item 2. Everyone's welcome to stay if you want to. We have a discussion of Caspian Beach, which is owned by the town of Hardwick, including current and future uses, community expectations, and coordination with the Hardwick Electric Department to ensure all operational maintenance and infrastructure needs are effectively addressed. And I did see Will, come on, I know you're here, so if you want to come into the room.
You want to take like a 5
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. Can we do that? Can we take a 5-minute break?
I think you can.
Not a beach going.
All right, we're going to continue with the agenda. Thank you all again so much. So we have item 2. I'm just going to keep it at discussion of Caspian Beach. And we have, what's your last name?
Marlier.
Marlier. We have Will Marlier here, who has put together some designs for some restoration in Caspian Beach. This just came up as really, it's just me personally. I was looking through the information from the last commission meeting, which was great to see everything that had been happening. And I noticed the report that you had provided, and I thought it was really interesting. And I thought it was something that the select board would also find interesting to know about and discuss with the commission. So I don't know if the commission has I think it makes sense, Will, to give the select board for you to just kind of explain the restoration plan that you gave to the commission.
Yeah, I can provide some context, and then I'm happy to take questions as we go. I also wanted to thank Miles from the commission. He suggested that I reach out to the select board and provide the same context, so it sounds like you guys had the same idea. And there was also the suggestion possibly that I liaison directly with the select board instead of the Board of Commissioners for Hardwick Electric, just in terms of, seems to be more appropriate, I guess, jurisdiction. So yeah, my name's Will Marlier. I work for the Orleans County Natural Resource Conservation District. You just heard from the Caledonia County Conservation District, so I work with Emily fairly often, and she does great work. I'm the Lake Watershed Program Specialist, and I have the pleasure of working quite often within the Caspian Lake watershed. This project was identified before I onboarded about a year ago. There was some relatively minor development of that project just in terms of, I guess, a feasibility study somewhat similar to what you just saw, but on a much smaller scale, right? So we're talking about a beach and maybe planting some trees this time instead of everything that's entailed with a dam removal. So hopefully this will be a little bit relaxing comparatively. I was joined by Dana Allen from Fluid State Consulting to present 30% designs as part of the grant that I obtained through clean water funds through the state. We're coming up towards the end of that process now, so we've got some rough designs that we've put together based on some public outreach. We did tabling in Hardwick and Greensboro to get some ideas from community members in terms of how the beach is currently used, how they want to make sure that the beach can be continued to be used in the future, and
hey Will, can you just pull your microphone closer?
For sure. Is this better? Okay. Is this just for people online, or is it for, yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, so we did some public outreach, including some tabling, and then also we did a community forum that unfortunately I think capped out at 5 to 6 attendees maybe, but again, this is just for the preliminary design, so we intend, if this project should move forward, to continue to do a more robust community engagement piece, just to make sure that we're hearing from a variety of voices throughout the greater Greensboro and Hardwick area. let's see, did I forget anything else? So I guess really what I'm coming here today to ask for from you, besides being able to answer questions for you about this process, is whether or not you're pleased with the designs that exist now, and whether or not you would consent to us pursuing final design and implementation for this project, which I believe that we would be successful in getting all the grant funding necessary to complete. Again, I can't make promises, but it seems likely based on the viability of this project and what we've done so far. And we don't believe that that would be at a cost to the town. But as it was pointed out earlier, any cost costs everybody something, or something like that.
Does the board have any questions?
I just want to say, I was at that meeting that you had in Greensboro. And are you assuming that everybody knows what your changes?
No, so I did distribute the designs as they currently exist to the Board of Commissioners for the Hardwick Electric Department, as well as, I believe the Select Board got it. I think I sent it to David, I don't know if it was, no. So I can have Dana share that to the screen now, and we can go over the proposed changes one at a time if we'd like to do that.
That would be great.
Would that be helpful? Great.
Can I ask one quick question before that? Has the beach committee that's been created by various organizations been invited to this meeting? Are our beach committee members here?
And it's the two towns that created the beach committee.
I understand.
You said various organizations.
Well, that's the two towns.
Okay.
Right, and I've talked to some other representatives of the beach committee as well throughout the process, including John Schweitzer and other members of the committee.
So they have not been invited and are not here, is that right? Thank you.
Just a suggestion, as you turn it over, and we are able to see the plan.
Yeah.
I reviewed it at different stages with you, but we have people here who are seeing it for the first time. So could you guys just state in correct terminology that I won't be able to do, what the goal of the program? I think it's water quality, it's runoff, but put it, start with that headline of why are we doing what we're doing.
Right, yeah, I can do that. And am I stalling for time for Dana to be able to share, or should I set up my computer so that I can share it directly? Is there?
Well, it looks like I can share.
Yeah, if you could just pull up the designs, that would be great.
Can you see this on your end?
Yeah, and I think just because the screen's a little small and far away from a lot of people in the audience, it might be helpful to zoom in and walk through it kind of piece by piece.
Yep.
So I'll provide a little bit more again of just the general context, why we're doing this, and then we can look at each design practice one by one and how that fits into the idea of what we're pursuing to accomplish. So the larger goal is primarily water quality improvements, and then secondarily habitat improvements and restoration as well. When we're talking about habitat, we're not, obviously with a parcel this small and that's used so heavily for public recreation, talking about creating really robust habitat for something like a moose. We're talking about pollinators, maybe some smaller birds or mammals and things like that. So it's aimed towards smaller habitat improvements. And one of the biggest ways that we can address water quality on this site is by reducing runoff from stormwater, which carries with it trace amounts of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, even more so from exposed soil and hard surfaces like the parking area on the site. So those are some of the things that we're trying to address. And I think maybe now, Dana, if you want to take it away, you can walk through each individual piece of that.
Yeah. Sorry, can everyone hear decently well in the room?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the idea with this design, this 30% concept was a relatively light touch because we know it's a high-use area, it's an important recreational asset, so, you know, we looked to minimize impact to the existing use as much as possible while reducing runoff to the greatest extent possible. And so, you know, I'll kind of work through these changes essentially from the bottom of the screen up, but one of the first things you'll see here, let's see, just make sure I have this grid. Vanishing pen, phenomenal. Okay, we have this concrete trench drain, and so this is essentially just meant to capture some of the runoff and the sediment that's coming from, you know, sort of the area leading to the boat ramp, and filter that in through this stone swale here, so capturing some sediment before it gets directly into the lake here. The other thing we're kind of proposing is making a better concrete ramp. Again, just under the name of you know, demobilizing some of the sediment. It's a gravel parking lot right now, so we can stabilize that surface, high-use area, probably one of the steeper areas on the site. That will kind of help us a little bit with sediment runoff and some nutrient runoff into the lake. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is that, you know, again, the beach area is really high use, but what we've seen, I think, over time is that the beach has kind of moved back for a variety of reasons, whether it's wave action, ice action, or, you know, even foot traffic and runoff from the parking lot. We do have a slight slope down through there. And so what we're proposing here is essentially what we're calling, what's a coir log with a stone toe. And so what that amounts to is a small, you know, stone wall, essentially, with this coir log. And I can actually pull up a detail of this. Sorry, hold on 2 seconds. We've got that in this upper corner here. And so essentially what we're looking at is, you know, these stones right here. This helps stabilize against wave action and ice action. There's this coir log, which is essentially a fabric wrapped, you know, dirt bag, essentially, that you can use to minimize erosion and plant in. And then there's a slight depression in front of that. And what that's going to do, and actually in the background too, you can see here's these wooden walkways. But what that's going to do in this area is it's going to capture what runoff is coming from the parking lot in that little depression behind that coir log and stone toe. Stone toe protects the edge. Coir log and depression captures the runoff and filters it a little bit through that log and through the stones. So that again captures sediment, reduces nutrient pollution into the lake, and will essentially backfill this area and reseed that lawn area. So most of the sandy beach stays intact, and then we have these wooden walkways through that area in an attempt, one, to provide good access to the beach, and two, to kind of encourage people to walk in certain areas, which might cut down on some of the erosion that's occurring here. We're also proposing to plant a few shrubs in this area. So not a lot, and, you know, shrubs, not trees, so 12 to 15 feet tall. Definitely want to have that root mass, which will help with erosion. It helps quite a bit, more than stone at times. We're also conscious of not, you know, shading this area too much, blocking views, etc. And then there's just a small swale up through here. This was actually identified by, I think, a citizen working group during a design charrette at one point. You know, they're calling it a pollinator swale. We thought that was a nice idea to incorporate in that area. What we really don't want it to do is block access through this road to the dam for maintenance or any needs there. We're not proposing touching this concrete retaining wall or this stone riprap because that's part of the dam's safety operations, and so that's something that they've specifically said, you know, we really can't mess with that, and Vermont Dam Safety similarly weighed in on that as well. So that's kind of the beach area, and then there's a couple small things, and then I'll open it up to questions. Back here, we've got this filter berm with a little bioretention. This is the other area of the property that typically gets a little bit more runoff, so essentially looking at runoff going this way off the parking lot and then down into this little tributary here. But essentially installing a really low berm with a little depression in front of it to capture some of the water. This will also help because I think this is snow storage in wintertime. And so when that melts off, you know, some of it obviously gets filtered in this vegetated area, but not all of it. So we're essentially adding like a belt to the suspenders in this area at a relatively low impact and low cost. And then the other thing that I wanted to note that we're trying to accomplish here is basically just increasing this treed buffer area to 50 feet. The reason we're going for 50 feet is that's kind of considered the minimum for water quality protection. And what that's doing is taking what little runoff there is from this lawn and filtering it through vegetation. A lot of it is getting filtered currently, but bringing it up onto this flat area would increase that. So an area right here, and then an area over here would equally be planted. So some of the lawn area would be reduced, but not significantly. And that's really the main portions of this design. So these buffer areas here, a little more planting of trees and shrubs, and then mostly a little bit of erosion control in this beach area. So yeah, happy to answer questions on this. Just one note, it is relatively hard to hear people in the room, I apologize. So maybe Will, if you can kind of repeat the questions in the microphone, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, I can do that. And then I think you briefly referenced, but can you go a little bit more into detail about the wooden ramps and why we're recommending their addition?
Yeah, so the wooden ramps, so there's two, one right here, one right here. And essentially we don't want people walking all the way, like always through this bioretention area and through these trees and that sort of thing. So it encourages, one, people using them to get through that bioretention and berm without having to step up and over things. It makes the beach a little more accessible. And it also tends to, we leave these stones that were placed there, I think, you know, to prevent people from driving onto the lawn and that sort of thing.
Dana, I actually just realized that you're looking at draft 2 and we have a draft 3. I think the only change is that there is a third walkway. Unless there's also one very minor change beside that. We did add the third walkway. Yeah, that's the newer iteration that has that third walkway, I think. But
okay, yeah, I think, let me pull that up, if I can find that real quick. There's been quite a few iterations.
We can field questions while he looks for that, if anyone has any.
Well, can I just ask a quick question about process? I mean, you
Sure.
already mentioned this, but we also got a lot of information from the last item.
Yeah.
So you've already had some design assurance, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some collaboration with the beach committee. It's gone before the commission, now it's going before the select board.
Right.
What is next before decisions are finally made?
Yeah, so that would be the entire process between, well, so we would need your approval to go into the next phase, essentially, which could be just 30% to final design or 100% design, or we could bundle that, depending on the will of this group, with implementation as well. Regardless of how that's done, the process to get to 30% to 100% would include further outreach, further stakeholder meetings, communications with the select board, and if it's deemed appropriate with the electric department as well, just to make sure that as we work towards the finalization of these designs, that people are still on board, they understand why these practices are being recommended, and that we feel like it's the appropriate solution for the site. This is kind of just the preliminary first draft of what we feel is appropriate based on the feedback that we've heard so far, but it's by no means the end of that process.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So from what you just described, I don't see 3 ratings by the way on that, but.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, it was that we moved one of the 2.
Okay.
So it's still 2, but
All right, so.
yeah. Yeah.
So it looks like you're taking away that whole grassy strip in front of the beach where lots and lots of people sit.
We're
over
actually
the beach.
increasing the grassy strip.
You're increasing it.
yeah.
So there'll still be places to sit down?
Yes,
there?
and it'll be almost like it's tiered a little bit more intentionally if we implement this, as opposed to right now, you kind of have that washed out area between the beach and the grassy strip where there's kind of that sandy grass. It would be clearly delineated with that stone toe and coir roll that Dana was referring to earlier, and everything behind that would be planted shrubs and grass. And the idea with that is that we wanted to have shrubberies to maintain some view shed still from the parking lot, so you can still look out onto the lake without having it completely interrupted by trees, and it would be spaced out in such a way that you could, I like the phrase, frame the view, so that you have some nature interspersed with still being able to see the lake. But there should still be room to get between those shrubs and sit either on that wall or on the granite blocks or on the grass. Yeah.
Also, in terms of shrubs, the trees that are there now are sort of prime real estate when you go to the beach.
Mhm.
Everybody wants to sit under the,
Yeah.
in the shaded areas. So the shrubs wouldn't provide that, but trees might.
I think that what we had
So-
discussed was if you see each of those little kind of green spots here, sorry. I think that one row is shrubs, and on the far end, we talked about having a larger tree that would maybe mirror the larger tree on the far side, so we'd create some more shady real estate there. Eventually, it takes time for trees to grow, but that the ones in between, that are kind of just between the beach and the parking lot, would stay shorter.
Larry, sorry, I can't see my.
Yeah, Larry. So I'm trying to visualize the shrubs that you're talking about.
Sure.
And I thought I heard you say earlier 12 to 14 feet. Is that right? Is that correct?
I don't know if we ever got to a specific species, Dana, and certainly that would be part of getting to final design, is we would pick a species that we felt was appropriate.
So I guess what I'm wondering about that is, the use that I see a lot of people sit on those stone benches and watch their kids in the water from the stone bench, and I'm wondering if, is that going to be blocked by the shrubs? Or only certain benches will have a view?
Yeah.
It seems like it will take away some of the use of those benches.
Yeah, so it was our intention to leave all of those granite blocks in place so that there could still be places to sit and view. Certainly it would be less of a cohesive view than it currently is if we were to plant things. So yeah, I think it would be a little bit interspersed. Depending on where you're trying to look, you have to sit in one place or another.
Okay.
What prompted this endeavor?
Right, so there are a few ways I can think of answering that. So there was a development process, project development, that was done in 2020 maybe, where some individuals from Northwoods, as well as Northwoods Stewardship Center, as well as the Conservation District that I represent, were called to look at that site and think about ways to use it as a case study for.
Called by who?
I'm not sure that I know that, but I can look into that and see what was the very first kind of catalyst for why they were requested to visit the site. Was it Lakewise?
Originally, this site was looked at with a Lakewise assessment. Will does these for Orleans now, but it was somebody else from Orleans that, actually, Emily may have been one of the first ones, because Emily, when she worked for Orleans, did Lakewise assessments. Very likely could have been her. We looked at properties around the lake. This was a property around the lake, so we looked at it and we thought it was also a very public, it would be very public. When we got some success with this, that we could use this as a promotion. So, anyways, we've done 50 Lakewise assessments around Caspian now. There's a few other projects in the works. This project went through a couple of phases. So I think it was called to by a Lakewise assessment done with some of the beach committee people, and at that that time, and then it grew into a possibility. And you said, Northwoods and a few others came up with a concept of changing the riprap wall that Mike Sullivan said, nope, can't take that out. We just spent a lot of money putting that in. The brick, the granite blocks, again, was done, so that didn't want to be changed. And so there's some restrictions that the project had based upon work that had just been done for dam repair and stuff like that.
So you're worried about the environmental impact on the lake water, is that?
Correct. Lakewise is looking for, as you said, looking for nutrient runoff.
So where does this nutrient propagate?
It ends up in the lake.
And where does it come from?
It's naturally occurring bound to the soil, but it's due to human development of the site that soil is more likely to run into surface water.
So that's happening all around the lake?
Correct.
Yes.
And this is a very small segment of that whole lake? So the effect of controlling this nutrient runoff is very little compared to the whole lake frontage?
Yeah, and actually thank you for making that point, because that is part of what we're trying to accomplish here, is to have a demonstration site at a very public location. It's one of the aspects of this project that's so enticing, is that it's got a lot of co-benefits. We'll have people that come here, we'll have interpretive signage that says these are the practices that we've put in place to reduce runoff, and that you can do similar things on your own properties around the lake, which is part of what assessments like Lakewise try to accomplish. Is you go from home to home, you look at a wider scale approach to the actual watershed itself, and not just one tiny parcel at a time.
Right.
So
that would all have to be voluntary and private property.
Stu, do you mind just stating your name for the minutes?
Oh, yeah, again, Stu Arnold, I'm the Caspian Lake Protection Chair of Greensboro Association.
Thank you.
yeah. And
Great. Sorry, I'll
sure, I'm happy to answer that question, but if you'd like to move on, then we can certainly do so.
Yeah, I know personally, I think that this was new to me. I definitely have kind of more personal questions based on how my son uses the lake and how that might change. And so I'm sure there are other people in Hardwick who would also have questions or feedback about it. So I'm wondering what that would look like. As I know you described kind of the next steps, but so it sounds like what you need from the select board, just to recap, is for us to give you a nod that yes, we would like to explore this further and take feedback for that?
Yeah, feedback would absolutely be a core tenet of how we move forward. So I think that what I'm looking for is permission to do that. It would be applying for grant funds to move forward and do that outreach. And depending on how far forward you would like me to apply for grant funding for, we could apply for just the remainder of the design process at this point, and then look to secure an additional grant for implementation at a later date, should those final designs be approved. Or I could bundle the implementation and the 100% design into a single grant package. All of the same public feedback process would still unfold, and I would still need to come and get approval before anything were implemented, even if I did already secure the funding for implementation, and that would be used in terms of figuring out how much money we could apply for. It would be used based off of these designs as they exist now. We would get some good ballpark figures to have a good idea of what implementation would likely cost. If that answers.
Okay,
Do
and just
we
so,
know
Paul, can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
So that would be, just so also, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I understand, if the town of Hardwick were to do that, because it's on us now to decide, then we would be directly partnering with OCCD for that? Or how would that work?
Yeah, so I would act as a project manager on behalf of the landowner, being the town of Hardwick. As was asked earlier, this is an entirely voluntary program. It's non-regulatory. It does need to receive regulatory approval to move forward based on the changes that we advocate for. But every step of the way, the landowner gets to decide whether or not they'd like to keep going, and then I can just represent that landowner as just providing technical assistance, navigating those funding streams, and hiring on subcontractors as necessary. Designers like Dana Allen from Fluid State Consulting, but then also, once we get to the implementation process, excavators and sourcing materials as necessary, working with local nurseries and implementers like that. So that would kind of be the role that Orleans County would assume in that case.
Great, thank you. Paul, you had a question?
Thank you. Yeah, Paul Fix again, Hardwick is that. Several questions. Do we know at this point, it sounds like you're collecting sediment. I'm imagining at some point there's some sort of long-term maintenance. Does your feasibility or 30% study at this point look at what that might be and how it would be done and what the cost might be?
Yeah, so Dana, that question was on operations and maintenance and what we know now based on the practices that we're proposing. So I'm going to just give a quick answer to that, and then maybe if you want to expand, go ahead. Part of these clean water projects, as required by the state, include operation and maintenance plans that would be developed and made public throughout this ongoing conversation as we approach 100% design. Talking with stakeholders, especially with the landowner, about who exactly would be doing that work going forward, cleaning out sediment traps and things like that to make sure that it is functioning as intended for the long term. Typically, the minimum timeline for an operation and maintenance plan is 10 years after installation. And yes, that's kind of the gist of it. And maybe Dana, if you want to expand on exactly what operations and maintenance might look like with these proposed practices, that could be helpful.
Sorry, I lost some of that, but I think there was a question about, I heard the O&M conversation, and I think that just to give my 2 cents on the O&M for this, this is pretty light touch again. It's fairly low maintenance overall, all things considered. You're looking at light gardening as the overall sort of maintenance regime here. The only thing that's not that is essentially the stone, soil, and concrete trench drain. Those trench drains do tend to fill up with sediment. That's their purpose in a way. And so those do have to be cleaned up periodically. It's usually just with a hoe or a shovel. It is something that someone has to do, but it's relatively easy. And then the stone swale, we're not looking at a large sediment load going to that, but over time that could eventually accumulate some sediment. And again, it really comes down to, hand tools, pulling that material out and then redistributing it back onto the parking lot, essentially where it came from. Or in the case of organic matter in there, composting it elsewhere, just not throwing it into the lake, ideally. That's the whole point, is that we don't want it to end up there as quickly, so.
Great.
And then part 2 of this question, just maybe not quickly, you mentioned regulators. Is Act 250 involved? And given the involvement of Hardwick Electric, would the Public Service Board be involved?
No, Act 250 would not be triggered by this project, and I might bounce that question to a Hardwick Electric Department representative.
Scott Johnstone, General Manager, Hardwick Electric. I would not expect it to be subject to Act 248 either, because they tend to focus on generation and operations of the distribution and transmission lines. So I would never say never, but I would not expect it to be.
Otherwise, the regulators in question are largely the staff of Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, their wetlands program, their floodplains and rivers program, and their lakes program, especially, as well as their watershed management. And I've been in touch with many of those regulators already, as these projects are set up in such a way that we get their feedback as stakeholders throughout, just to make sure that it's a viable project throughout. We would hate to get far in this process and then all of a sudden hear that there's some regulatory hang-up. So at this point, it's our understanding that this is all feasible.
So we're not all sitting together, but select board members, do you have any? So we basically have to give Will a decision tonight if we want him to find funding to continue with a design phase. And then
have more community input and feedback. So board members, how are we looking data?
So do you want a motion?
Sure.
Is it okay if I comment?
Sure, we also will, even if we have a motion, Jake, there will be a discussion period too, so.
I would just say, I heard Will propose two options. One was a motion to approve further, like 100% design. The second was 100% design with implementation. Both included the community process. Correct me if I'm hearing you wrong.
That's all right. Yeah, that's correct.
I'm Jake Lester, Board of Commissioners. I would recommend that the select board consider the latter option in the interest of moving the project forward.
So I would make the motion that we move forward that way, where we have both design, 100% design and implementation resources and all of that together. Wasn't well worded, but that's my motion.
With public input, public engagement.
That's involved in all of it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, you have a second. Any more discussion? I do have a question. Well, what would be the timeline if you got funding? Like, what's your kind of goal and the timeline for implementation?
Yeah, so I would likely apply for, let me answer that question first, and I actually had a question for you as well. So I would apply to the next round of enhancement funding, and I would have to look into exactly when that is. I believe it'll be, the last one's in January, so the next one should be this summer. And then there's a process where they rank their applications and decide the awards. Before we got to that, I would need some liaison or representative from the town to work with me just to sign like a landowner agreement type form, just to say that we have the town of Hardwick's consent to apply for this grant on their behalf. And then we would likely complete the design and outreach through fall and into the winter. And we could have implementation ready for the summer of '27. That does beg the question, is fall and winter really the best time to be doing public outreach on a public lake site? Probably not. So we could further delay it if we did want to intentionally set up that kind of public outreach to align with kind of the height of the summer season. We could plan to do that public outreach next summer, but I don't think that we could realistically get the grant funding in hand fast enough to do a robust public outreach process this summer, unless maybe we could do it like late August possibly. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Will? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. Amelia, you put together such incredible notes. Do you have a motion drafted? Do you mind rereading it?
Sherry made a motion to do the 100% in implementation with public engagement, and Derek seconded.
Okay, great. That's the motion on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, sorry, writing notes. Nay?
Nay.
Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay. So the ayes have it. So the next step will you be in touch?
Yeah, and I'd like to know what would maybe be the most expeditious form of contact and communication with the select board for the purposes of this project, in terms of, talking about the landowner agreement and getting that signed, in terms of, I can look at exactly when we might expect to have that grant funding come in and maybe talk about public outreach around that. I imagine it'd be cumbersome to have me come back just to each select board meeting for each issue. So I don't know if you have really like deputize someone or how you'd like to do that.
It's a great question. I think what we should do is invite you back, Will, to another select board meeting where
Sure.
you can, it would be great, I think, to also have that, whatever you would need for us to sign for that. You could give any information to the town manager's office and then put in a board folder, and then we can then deputize Adam. I think that makes sense. If you're okay with going back to another select board meeting.
Sure, that's fine.
And then we can assign somebody for that.
So I would come back to the next select board meeting to just present the document for signing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it can just go in the board folder and we can all review it and then.
What's the document?
It's a landowner agreement form, simply to say that I have the permission of the town of Hardwick to pursue this grant funding on their behalf.
Just wanting to basically promising to extract value from the local inhabitants. Paid by the town manager.
Or to provide value to the town inhabitants, maybe?
Maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, so Will, you can just give that right to Amanda, you can email that to Amanda, and then we'll put you on the next agenda.
Not building barriers to keep the private industry from coming in here and.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for joining us, and thank you, Will. Did the commissioners have anything they wanted to add to this?
What's that?
Did the commissioners have anything they wanted to add to the, you got this presentation too, so I assume you answered, got all your questions answered. Okay, great, thank you very much.
Is this
So,
presentation available
adjourn.
publicly, and where would we find it? No, I mean, the report we're reading from.
The 30% designs that were presented tonight, they're in the minutes of the last Hardwick Electric Department.
Do you want to make sure it has the
meeting.
right number of walkways in it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I sent those in, and it was the third and most recent draft.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the next item we have, thank you, Will.
Yep.
The next item we
All
have
right, Dana,
are
we're dismissed.
select board reports.
All right, thank you very much all, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dan. Great, and we have new business, old business. Great, thank you all.